Hello everyone, today I want to talk to you about how Trump is targeting Apple, as well as his approval of Nippon Steel's acquisition. The logic behind both actions is the same. In addition, Trump is making moves against the European Union. What exactly does he want to gain from this? It seems like he really wants to impose high tariffs. After Trump pushed through the so-called Great America Act in the House of Representatives on May 22 by a single vote, he started taking action on all fronts. He banned Harvard from accepting international students, wanted to impose a 50% tariff on the EU, demanded that Apple and Samsung manufacture their phones in the US, or else face a 25% tariff, and also approved Nippon Steel's acquisition of US Steel. Some people say that Trump has gone crazy, but actually, Trump isn't crazy, has a whole set of Trump-style internal logic. It may not necessarily work, but at least he's not acting irrationally without any purpose. Let's start with his Great America Act, officially called the Big Beautiful Bill, or BBB for short. That name is just so Trump. The bill passed in the House of Representatives on May 22 by a vote of 215 to 214. Trump had to work very hard to prevent Republican members from rebelling in order to get the bill passed. However, even some Republican lawmakers are deeply concerned that this bill will continue America's massive fiscal deficit, which could eventually turn into a debt crisis. So why do we need this big beautiful bill? We have to start from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 1977 during the Trump 1.0 era. The last tax cut bill was the largest tax reform in over a century and a half. It significantly reduced taxes, allowing businesses to benefit on a large scale, and at the time, it earned Trump a great deal of praise. However, the scale of the tax cuts was so great that within 10 years, US government revenue would decrease by $4 trillion, further expanding the fiscal deficit and requiring a massive issuance of national debt to fill the gap. But at the time, Trump claimed that the tax cut bill would spur economic growth, that it was a good thing, and that government revenue would increase significantly, making it possible to eliminate the fiscal deficit. Of course, that's not how things turned out. 7 years later, the situation is even worse than the worst expectations. US national debt has grown from 21 trillion to the current 36.9 trillion, and it will soon reach 37 trillion. A crisis has emerged with US Treasury bonds. The tax cut bill passed back then stipulated that the tax cuts could not be permanent and that the original tax rates would be restored by the end of 2025. However, nobody likes tax increases. When Trump was campaigning last year, he promised to extend the tax cut bill, which is now known as the Big Beautiful Bill. At the time, Trump even boasted that he would cut taxes further, but now things have become very complicated. On one hand, US Treasury bonds are on the verge of collapse, while on the other hand, the tax cut policy simply cannot be discontinued. Trump decided to first pass the Big Beautiful Bill to continue the tax cuts, prioritizing economic growth for now. Putting yourself in Trump's mindset, faced with America's massive fiscal deficit and the ticking debt time bomb, he had to defuse the crisis quickly. So, right after passing the Big Beautiful Bill, he made his move. Trump's first strike was aimed at Harvard. The US government suddenly ordered Harvard to stop admitting foreign students. Now, thousands of international students either have to transfer to another school or lose their legal status. Harvard promptly applied for a temporary restraining order from a Massachusetts court to block the federal government's action, and the legal battle is set to continue. In fact, Harvard is already on summer break, so the US government's ban won't affect international students right now. The real impact will only begin in the third week of August. Trump isn't just targeting Harvard, he wants to send a message to all his opponents that he can be extremely ruthless, that he'll make an example out of one to warn the rest. This is what he calls the art of negotiation. Simply put, it's all about intimidation. Trump's second strike is aimed at the mobile phone giant. Before the Harvard issue was even settled, Trump set his sights on Apple. Trump suddenly lashed out at Apple, saying that he had told Apple's vice president a long time ago that he wanted the iPhones sold in the US to be made in America, not in India or anywhere else. Otherwise, Apple would have to pay at least a 25% tariff in the US. Previously, all the iPhones Apple sold in the US were made in China, but later they got scared too. With Trump's America First policies, Apple started moving its factories to India. Recently, Apple CEO Tim Cook even announced that in the future, most of the iPhones sold in the US will come from India, meaning they are gradually shifting all iPhone production for the US market from China to India. However, don't be fooled by how Trump appears to be all chummy and friendly with Indian Prime Minister Modi on the surface. In reality, Trump is very dissatisfied with Apple moving its factories to India. He believes that iPhones must be manufactured in the United States, otherwise that 25% tariff is waiting for you. Next, Trump expanded his focus to target Samsung phones from South Korea. If Samsung wants to sell smartphones in the United States, they also have to manufacture them in the US, otherwise they'll have to pay a 25% tariff as well. What Trump actually wants is for them to do what TSMC did announce, a $165 billion investment in Arizona to build 8 wafer fabs and advanced packaging plants. He wants Apple and Samsung to follow TSMC's example and announce massive investments to build factories in the United States. But can Apple and Samsung really set up manufacturing in the US? CNN once analyzed that if Apple really moved iPhone production back to the United States, the cost would triple. Currently, an iPhone that costs $1,900 would end up selling for $3,500. Would anyone still buy an iPhone at that price? But Trump is in a hurry now, and he doesn't really care whether this is feasible for Apple and Samsung. Otherwise, you just add a 25% tariff at least the US government can collect the tax. According to estimates from Statista, US smartphone sales in 2024 are close to 110 billion. That means even if tariffs cause prices to rise and sales to drop a bit, a 25% tariff could still bring in about 25 billion in tax revenue. Trump's third move is aimed at the European Union. Less than 30 minutes after announcing tariffs on iPhones, he announced a 50% tariff increase on the EU. On his own Truth Social platform, Trump said that the main purpose of the EU's establishment is to take advantage of the United States in trade. They have always been difficult to deal with their strong trade barriers, value-added tax, convenient measures for businesses to punish non-tariff trade barriers, currency manipulation, and unfair and unreasonable lawsuits against American companies, among other things, have led to the United States running an annual trade deficit of more than 250 million with the EU. This figure is completely unacceptable. According to this post, in fact, the EU's trade surplus with the US last year was 235 billion. Trump should have said 3 fewer zeros. Trump went on to say, "My discussions with them have made no progress at all, so I propose that starting from June honest of this year, we directly impose a 50% tariff on the EU. If the product is made or produced in the United States, then no tariff will be charged." Thank you for your attention to this matter. Later, when Trump was asked at the White House whether he hoped to reach an agreement with the EU in the next 9 days, he said he did not. He said, "I am not seeking to reach an agreement with the EU. What I mean is, we have already decided on a plan which is to impose a 50% tariff on the EU." After China and the US reached a preliminary agreement, the EU became tougher toward the United States, which clearly angered Trump. Observers believe that if the US imposes a 50% tariff on EU products, it will cause prices in the US to rise sharply. Holsby, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of California, said that a 10% tariff was already the highest tariff rate the US had imposed on the world in years, and a 50% tariff on the EU would be a completely different magnitude. If implemented, it could lead to stagflation. This would be the worst case scenario for the central bank. But Trump has always ignored the negative effects of tariffs. For a long time, he's repeatedly accused Europe of taking advantage of the United States through trade. On April 20, he announced a comprehensive 20% tariff increase on the EU, but he quickly lowered the tariff to 10% for a period of 90 days. The EU also has to deal with Trump's tariffs on specific industries, as well as a 50% tariff imposed on all European steel and aluminum imports. Originally, the EU wasn't even subject to a 10% tariff, but now Trump has raised the threshold to 50%. Trump's strategy seems to be treating 20% as the base tariff for tea. Idea is that if negotiations go well, a 20% tariff will be imposed, but if they don't, it will be 50%. Trump is convinced that the EU doesn't dare to engage in a full-scale trade war with the US like China does, so among his major opponents, he is targeting the EU first, taking them on one by one. It does seem that Trump really wants to impose tariffs on EU products. According to data released by Eurostat, in 2024, the EU exported 531.6 billion euros worth of goods to the United States. If a 20% tariff were imposed, the US would collect over $100 billion in tariffs. Trump's fourth move is to support Nippon Steel's acquisition of US Steel, saying that the cooperation plan between the two sides will help create jobs and stimulate the American economy. Trump posted on Truth Social, saying that the cooperation between US Steel and Nippon Steel will create at least 10,000 jobs and bring in $1.4 billion for the US economy. He also stated that the main investment opportunities will take place over the next 14 months. Nippon Steel proposed to acquire US Steel during Biden's administration, initially promising to invest only $1.4 billion in US steel after the acquisition, but the Biden administration rejected the deal on the grounds of national security. In August last year, after raising the post-acquisition investment amount to $2.7 billion, Nippon Steel recently made an even bigger offer, saying it would invest $14 billion and ultimately succeeded in gaining Trump's approval for the merger. To sum it up, first, Trump may be wild, but he's not completely crazy. All his actions are aimed at seizing opportunities to fill the fiscal black hole left by the continuation of the big, beautiful tax cut plan. Second, by targeting Harvard, Trump wants to send a message to all his opponents that he is a tough wolf, so they shouldn't try to go up against him. Third, by targeting the EU, he sees that the EU's ability to resist is limited, so he wants to extract the greatest possible benefit by significantly increasing tariffs. Fourth, by going after Apple and Samsung and agreeing to the acquisition by Nippon Steel, he genuinely wants to bring manufacturing back to the United States. So Trump's actions follow his own set of logic, and his series of moves are interconnected. But does this really save America? That's another question altogether. Of course, how much inflation or even stagflation will these actions bring to the United States? Trump himself may not have fully calculated this, and if it really happens, he might not be able to handle it.